Dan is the co-founder of Jurorsearch, which is, I think, a really innovative piece of software that I would have liked to have had when I was a trial lawyer. I always found that um, the the part of the trial that I thought was most pivotal, but also was the hardest to track, was jury selection. And Dan has created a solution that makes that a lot more systematic, a lot more transparent, and a lot easier. And so we're going to be talking about that. But first, Dan, I would like to talk about your background, because you have somewhat of an unusual path through the law. And so I'd love for our listeners to hear about that journey. So
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for having me. This is fun. So yeah, I got out of law school in 2000 and into politics, into government. Started working for a nonprofit called Fair Vote that advocates for proportional voting and a ranked ballot. New York City is actually using a ranked ballot for the first time in a couple of months for their Democratic primary for mayor. So I went to San Francisco, campaigned for what was then called Proposition A, where you could give a first choice and a second choice, third choice on your ballot, and same day voter registration. So that introduced me to lobbying. And I became a full-time lobbyist with my own firm a few years after that, in 2003. Still run that firm.
Were you interested in politics before you went to law school, or is that a
Yeah.
path that kind of developed?
Oh, I always loved, I was, I went to law school to be like Ralph Nader.
Uh-huh.
I just thought it was amazing that, you can, save lives with regulation. I got in a car crash when I was in high school, like a bunch of male teenagers. My brain wasn't fully developed and a very bad driver. Got in a crash and the airbag saved my life. So I felt some sense of obligation to understand how that came to be. And but I always loved the power of public good and understanding how government works. So didn't really know what a lobbyist was, but
Uh-huh.
wanted to understand those skills. And I love the legislative branch. I just think it's accessible and human and entrepreneurial. So I've spent a lot of time with the legislative branch for the last 20 years or so.
Okay, yeah, it's really interesting. I've known a lot of attorneys that have gone in and at least dabbled in legislation or in lobbyist activities and legislation at the state levels, and it really is somewhere that you can get in as a lawyer and make a difference. So I'm sorry I interrupted your background story.
No, states are where it's at. State capitals are great. State legislators are almost universally great people. They're sort of like your little league coach or, your PTA mom. They're just sort of nice, accessible people. And, one thing for lawyers, right? We find problems in the law. And I think a lot of times, maybe this is a digression, but a lot of times we sort of act like the law, the statute is static and we just have to maneuver around it. And we forget that it's really plastic and that there are all these like well-intentioned, reasonable, nice people whose job it is to change the statute. They meet every year or every 2 years, and they like hearing from people with specific improvements to the statute that make life better for folks. So I think sometimes law school is very judicial focused, right? We read opinions. We don't really read legislative debates. And then we kind of overlook, the first branch, right? Article 1. But yeah, I'd encourage people to really get to know their state legislators. It would come to them with shortcomings in the law because legislators love it, right? Then they don't have to do the homework. They can just do their work to convince their colleagues to pass it.
Yeah, so tell me about some of your adventures, through the law that led you ultimately to do what you're doing now with
Yeah,
Jurorsearch.
it's a winding road. I mean, I
Hmm.
I never litigated a trial. I never picked a jury.
Hmm.
And so I was in politics and had a company that offered political software and political data. In the political world, right, there's huge amounts of data on everybody, right? Magazines you read, and anytime you answer a survey, right, you can kind of compile that and have a sense of how people lean on different issues. And one day, a friend who's now a part of Jurorsearch said, who'd be interested in this stuff would be trial lawyers, right? When they're picking a jury, they'd like to know, like,
Absolutely.
who sort of thinks big corporations have too much power, who sort of thinks, that we should respect the police, and that, if somebody's arrested, it's probably for a good reason, right? Kind of know these things about people, good educated guesses. So he started pitching trial lawyers and saying, hey, look, we got all this data. What do you think? And discovered the industry of jury consultants, right? People that deal with picking juries all the time. And a great guy in Chicago named Dan Wolf said, the data's nice. Maybe it's 100% accurate. Probably not, right? It's good. But really what we need is our industry of people that pick juries for a living. We don't have a software product. And the most sophisticated teams you can imagine, we're using Excel. And we're, texting each other and sending emailed spreadsheets. And maybe we're generating some PDFs, but we don't have a software product that allows us all to collaborate, do all the online research to discover any evidence of bias, convey that to the attorney in the way that he or she finds intuitive and actionable, keeps track of your strikes, keeps your running counter. We just don't have a product like that. So you've got a neat interface. Maybe you should work on that. And so I took his advice. Yeah, it was wonderful. Great mentor. Took his advice and kept building. And it's
when was that? What year?
That was just before the pandemic. So in 19.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So we got a couple, some people in Chicago tried what we had. It was buggy, but they were willing to try it. And then we launched our beta just around the shutdown. Right. So we had it out there right as, everything stopped. And so the bad news of having a software product that manages jury selection during a pandemic is there aren't any jury trials. But the good news is all these professionals and attorneys and consultants had a lot of time to share what their wish lists are. And so we developed this culture of listening, because, I've never picked a jury. So what do I know? And so we just we'd show them what we had, hear what people would say, and then got in this habit of every week deploying new features and new enhancements and new tweaks based on what people said they wanted. And so we keep that to this day where, the product's never done. There's always, somebody wants it a certain way, they like to rank them in a customized way, or they want to see the screen differently. And the awesome thing about software is you can do that.
It's the jury selection. I think it's so ripe for innovation and disruption. And, most of our audience is going to be solo practitioners and small law firms. However, I want to talk about the use cases for all of them, just so you understand that I feel the pain that you're solving. I was a trial lawyer for about a decade, and I was a criminal defense lawyer. And as a criminal defense lawyer in private practice, there are no jury consultants. Right. There was no budget for that. And the majority of trials that I did were misdemeanor trials where they'd bring in like 30 to 40 potential jurors from a pool, and we'd whittle it down to somewhere between 8 and about 12 or 14, depending on the size of the jury, depending on whether it was a misdemeanor or felony. Especially at the misdemeanor level, they'd be filtering the jurors in a line into the courtroom, filling up the spectator seats, filling up the jury box. At the same time, they handed us this stack of carbon copy papers with 5 or 6 questions that the jurors answered, and then a chart that like where there's like if you had like really small writing, you could kind of write there. And
Yeah.
so I always had my clients, I put them to work because I'm trying to like listen to what the jurors are saying. I'm trying to um, question them during voir dire. I'm trying to understand their biases. I'm trying to look for nonverbal cues. And I can't keep track of it at the same time. So I always had my client take notes. But the notes, depending on the client, they could be really good, they could be really bad. And I tried to solve it with technology. Back then, it was, old school tablet PCs that were running Windows XP or something like that, and it would crash half the time, and it would freeze the other half, and
Right.
yeah, it almost just became an exercise in instinct. And your product sounds like exactly what I would have liked to have had while I was practicing law and picking jurors. So
Yeah, and I'll show
let's
you,
jump in and talk about how this works for people like me.
because this is what people use, right? Post-it notes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they'll literally
If you
like
even have
move it.
time to do that.
Right, right. But they'll literally use post-it notes and move them around, big
Mm-hmm.
piece of cardboard, right? In 2021. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so especially with trying to keep track of Batson challenges, which are, impermissible reasons why the state might or the defense might use one of their peremptory strikes, which is a strike of right.
Mm-hmm.
Either side can use it to remove a juror, but it gets to be a real challenge to keep track of all that data and information, and you're supposed to be looking at the jurors. Right? um, so yeah, you're right, it is a real problem. And we also think, it shouldn't be that controversial, but typing notes into a computer is faster and cleaner and keeps a better record than scribbling something on a legal pad or post-it notes. Right? And so,
But it doesn't send the right message though. For me, if I'm in front of a juror, I know I'm trying the case the moment that juror walks in, or the jury walks in. And so like I need to have somebody else be able to do that, or I need to have a like super efficient, discreet way for me to do it.
yeah,
And so like if I had like a system that I could have at that point handed my client and said, you type this in, just like
right.
you let me make the connection with the jurors, you let me start trying this case, because if the juror sees me judging them, then they're going to judge me back. And so it's like it was, it's theater right from the time that they walk in. And so it sounds like you create a lot of efficiencies with what you do.
I think so. And it is helpful. It's really hard to do it by yourself, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
have nobody
It really
taking notes,
is.
it's almost an impossible task, and you're
Yep.
basically relying on memory. And so whether you use paper or Jurorsearch,
Mm-hmm.
anybody that is picking a jury by themselves, you're ultimately doing it on memory. Where
Mm-hmm.
that gets to be a real challenge is, particularly for prosecutors, is you got to keep a record, right? Because you could have a Batson challenge on appeal 6 months or a year later. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's probably not great practice. I mean, it's great you got your clients to do it, but like somebody needs to keep notes. It happens fast, and I think the benefit of using software that's built for it is it's easy to keep those notes organized by juror,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's easy to like instantly rank them 1 through 5 or A through F or whatever ranking system you want. And it's easy to keep track of the strikes. Like you got to know how many peremptories you've got left, right? There's like a
Mm-hmm.
game of Battleship that happens towards the end
Yep.
when, do I have 3 left or do I have 2 left? And which ones do I think the other side's going to use? Because if I get rid of Sally, well, I'll be stuck with Bert. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of game theory, right? That's happening
Mm-hmm.
fast. And it's helpful to have that, in one place where you can visualize it.
So does it help you keep track of not only the numbers that you have, but like if I use a preemptory on this person, this is how the cascade works, and who's going to end up? Are you able to kind of see a model of who's likely to end up in that jury box?
That one's coming. We don't have that today, but we keep getting requests for it, and I'm still puzzling through how
Hmm.
to visualize it. So we have a strike strategy workflow, which is
Okay.
okay, but it's not where it should be, where you
Uh-huh.
can, they're basically check boxes, right? You indicate who do I think they're going to strike, and then you can sort. So you can see like, okay, I think they'll do two more and I think I'll do two more. So you can kind of see it, but
Hmm.
the ability to sort of have a, projected jury box, if this, then I'll end up with that. And you can assign numbers. So this is the average,
Hmm.
right? That one's coming, but it's fun and I haven't figured it out yet, how to make that into, as you know, with software, making something sophisticated on the back end, but intuitive on the front end
Hmm.
is hard.
It's so hard. Yeah, and you, your beta testing is probably a lot different than a lot of legal tech companies because I mean to really have this be working in action, you've got to have a live jury. I mean, you could kind of do it with mock juries, but
Right.
and then I imagine you've got a complex problem here because every court does it differently. And I've been
Yes.
hearing from friends that are starting to venture back into the courtroom now that some of the restrictions have been lifted. And okay, it's not that we're bringing in the whole jury at once so you can see everybody's reaction. They're bringing one juror in at a time, social distancing, which gives you the chance to get to know them a little bit better, but I think also has some disadvantages because you don't have that, like, you can't see how they react to each other,
Right.
who's a lion and who's a sheep, so to speak.
Right.
So
Right. It's hard to see leadership qualities individually.
yeah. Yeah.
But you're right. It's a dizzying array of procedures and processes around the country, which is really interesting. It's a kind of a cool little area of the law that isn't really studied much, but it
Yeah.
is really interesting. But that speaks to, we have like a visual representation, right? We call it jury seats. So, it's
Hmm.
sort of rows of seven, as many as you want, and then you click and pick your juror. But
Hmm.
every new client we speak with or prospect, they'll share that, like I was just talking to somebody in Florida in a prosecutor's office, and they're like, yeah, why would you leave your seat when you're stricken, right? Because that's our default, right? When Dan Jaffe, I'm going to strike him, so once he's strict, he's gone, and somebody else can sit in their seat. Well, they're like, well, no, that seat remains open, like
Yep.
like somebody just died at the Thanksgiving table or something, right? Like it stays open in Florida forever. And right, so all right, I guess we need to build that feature that you could strike them, but instead of disappearing, you need like the big red like Family Feud X in front of it or something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mostly I've seen it work like the Tonight Show, where the new guest comes in and the old guest moves down a seat, and yeah, that type of thing, and then
Yeah, but
eventually gets pushed off the end. But
totally. That's standard,
yeah.
but that's not how they do it in Florida. And then they have like like we just released a new one called Prompt. But they wanted, one of the clients wanted a grid of, 16 by 4 seats where the
Hmm.
pictures are very small, but then the text is very large. And some people said, like, I really want a grid of like 100 tiny little dots, right? Where I can, I just want red or green and like very, very small so I can customize if they're all in the gallery. And so the use cases get um, you know complicated, and they want customization, which is not fair, right? So we can do it for them, but to your point, it happens in lots of different ways. So we ended up with this pitch that we're really customized software for your process, and we
Hmm.
end up feeling more like an IT managed services company because there's just a lot of time to customize it for each client because they're all different. And we're happy to do
I,
it, right? Because if this guy does it that way, well, the whole state does it that way. So we're happy to learn and build it the right way for them, and then other people can use it.
And I think that's how most software, at least business to business software, starts out. In especially in the early days, you kind of have to see what the market wants. You have to adapt and so forth. But my observation and I did jury trials all over Washington State and all over Arizona. And there were places like in Phoenix, the municipal court. I've tried a lot of cases there, and then there were cases like I went and I tried a case in the town of Coolidge, Arizona,
Hmm.
and I did the first jury trial there that they had done in 25 years. They brought out jury instructions from 25 years ago. For whatever reason, nobody ever challenged the state there. And I had a client who wanted to do so and brought me in, and I drove down. It was, he came up to the Phoenix area to get me for that. And they didn't have a jury box. They brought in folding chairs. I ended up with a mom and a daughter who I think lived in the same household on the same jury. And, it was crazy. Like they were just making it up as they go along. But then in the larger jurisdictions, this is a problem that if you could sell a way of systematizing and making uniform jury selection and kind of the herding of information on either a statewide or even on a national level, you would be doing the legal profession such a service. And it seems like you're kind of on your way to doing that.
That's interesting. I mean, I had this notion that actually there's a little empty website up, but like there isn't a voir dire library. There isn't a collection of voir dire procedures. And
Uh-huh.
so, even stuff like, do the judges ask the question or do the attorneys ask the question? Can you backstrike? Meaning like we both say, Dan Jaffe, all right, we're good with you. And then an hour and a half later, we're like, actually, I'm going to strike him because
Mm-hmm.
I like all the other new jurors more. Um, and all the different nuances, do you put four in a box and then you come to terms on those four and then that's a lock? And then you go to the next four, or do you have all 50 and can you strike an alternate? So how many peremptories you get, right? You get
Mm-hmm.
15 peremptories. So I just thought it'd be fun to collect that information and at least begin with a data source as how voir dire happens.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't gotten anywhere with it, but it would be nice to have.
Well, and I think educating judges, especially around voir dire, my observation also was that, from my perspective as a trial lawyer, picking that jury was the trial. Like if
Yeah.
that didn't go well, nothing else would go well after that. It didn't matter. And judges looked at it as a stupid formality that they had to get through. Almost universally, it was like, let's rush this as much as possible. We can get these people that aren't selected out of here so they're not sitting there. We can get this court in motion. And I mean, it resulted in in the courts where the judge was particularly apathetic to the result of jury selection, where the judge would say, I'm asking all the questions. And it was, typically it was criminal trials that I was doing. And the judge would, in this one court in particular, would start with, as we sit here today, this defendant, and would always say this defendant rather than Mr. Whatever, this defendant is presumed innocent. Now, if you had to go and knowing that he is charged with X, Y, or Z crime, if you had to go vote right now, would you vote guilty or not guilty? Raise your hand for guilty. And the judge would raise her hand, and 95% of the people in the courtroom would raise their hand. And then watching the judge, no, that's not the right answer. So let me tell you this again. Let me spoon feed this to you for the record. He is presumed not guilty. So would you vote guilty right now, not having anything to have overcome that presumption. And then only like 75% of the people would raise their hand. And the judge would typically go, good enough. Let's move on. And I'm sitting here like, and I had one case where we did that, or that happened. And my client just looked at me and said, what are we doing here? And there were really no tools that I had to be able to educate the judge as to why she just prejudiced the jury and kept reinforcing it over and over again. And yeah, we had no record for appeal, but
Right.
that's not where most small law firm lawyers, and
No,
that's not where most clients live.
that's interesting.
So,
There isn't, I hadn't thought about it that way. Sort of some best practices for voir dire for the judge to consider. I mean, interestingly, speaking of municipal courts, I got a call from the presiding judge of the Salt Lake City Municipal Court, who is a really innovative guy and wanted to do a survey with implicit bias. Right.
mhm,
So some studies show that if you take a survey about implicit bias and sort of bring attention to it, then it really reduces jurors, bias for at least a week,
mhm.
right? Because you're like aware of it.
Okay.
And
Oh,
so he wanted,
interesting.
yeah, but he couldn't find a tool. And he's like, I don't really want to do like Survey Monkey. But he
Uh-huh.
found Jurorsearch and he asked whether we could build something for the court, right? We're built for lawyers. So he said,
Uh-huh.
sure, right? So we're now managing surveys for the Salt Lake City Municipal Court. And we, got the domain name jurycard.com, which is kind of easy to find,
Mhm.
right? 8 letters, so that's a good one. Because we built a survey feature for Jurorsearch, right? If you get some
Mhm.
surveys, you got to get that data in, you got to get those answers in, and then track it by juror. But we just reconfigured it for the court, so then they can transmit the veneer electronically, which is a whole other thing. It's ridiculous we're still transmitting veneers on paper and not sending a
Yeah.
data, right? I mean, just ridiculous.
Well, it
Um,
seems to me if you could get the courts to use that, not only would it increase efficiencies, but then why wouldn't any attorney subscribe to it if you could just tap in and get that information?
just to say, look,
Wow.
here's a database. Like, you want to use Excel? Feel free, but like the paper thing, we got to get past it.
I think you're solving a huge problem. It's a market that I haven't really looked at in terms of a total addressable market, but it seems like, I mean, you've got the courts, you got prosecutors, you got public defenders, you got private attorneys, you've got jury consultants. Did I miss anybody else in the target
Uh,
market?
so you got the criminal defense private bar.
Hmm.
You got some civil litigators, and that's about it.
So huge market. So basically, any lawyer that could find themselves in court, every single court that does jury trials, and every single public entity that conducts jury trials. Um, and it's like Stone Ages.
Yeah,
I mean, just Stone Ages right now. Like, I mean,
I mean, some courtrooms do have carbon paper,
mhm.
right? They do in
Yeah,
2021. So
yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement. The only mitigating factor to sort of reduce the total addressable market is, the disappearing jury trial, right? That,
Mhm.
as you know, most cases settle, most criminal cases plea out, which is a problem. Uh, so pre-pandemic, it's about 150,000 jury trials a year,
Mhm.
all maybe another 5,000 federal. So that's kind of how I think about, the size and scope of it. It's not clear how many courtrooms there are that are doing jury trials, but you're right. It's a process which I think is noble and wonderful and part of the American experiment. The jury itself is an amazing
Mhm.
institution, but we could upgrade our operating tools to increase some
Oh
efficiency and get
yeah.
away from paper.
Well, and it seems to me that because jury trials, all but stopped during the pandemic, and what I'm hearing from friends is that, well, now these courts have this like backlog of jury trials, and so now I have a trial date, and my trial date is this Tuesday, next Tuesday, the Tuesday after that, the Tuesday after that for the same case, and so every Monday they're on call. at this
Wow.
point, and there's a 2 hour window, and they've got to be perpetually ready for trial because their number could get drawn out of the bingo wheel, or however the particular court ends up doing it for that week. And if they've got the band together, if there's the jury there, there's an open seat on the bench, or with the judge on the bench, and a courtroom's open, then your life's on hold as a
Yeah, that's
trial
rough.
lawyer with cases on a docket right now. And I know that the judges are feeling it as well, and prosecutors are feeling it. Yeah, there's going to be like some natural settlements that are going to happen because there's just not the bandwidth for it. And I'm sure insurance companies kind of dig that. And I'm sure, there's a lot of, if the prosecutor's offices get overwhelmed, there's like a lot of defendants that are going to benefit. But it seems like you're on the verge of solving one of the great bottlenecks in our court system.
I appreciate it. I do think it can help, particularly if you think about because this is what the Salt Lake City court's doing, the qualifying questions. So people should do that at home, right? We should not summon people to come to the courtroom and then answer qualifying questions on a piece of paper and then say, all right, well, you take a hike, you're out, right? So what we're doing for the Salt Lake City judge is, it's just a form, but they can fill it out, and then they can at home, right? You get your letter, you get your 8-digit code, you log into jurycard.com, you answer, it's like 90 questions, so you answer them all, and then the judge's staff can say, all right, well, here's who we're bringing in downtown on this day. And so it speeds up actual trial day, and it doesn't kill that hour or two in the morning when otherwise they're herding people around and, photocopying paper surveys, which happens, right? And everyone's kind of waiting for 45 minutes, and these are all billables, and the backlog grows. So I do think we can help in speeding up the process of getting the qualified jurors sat for voir dire to begin.
Yeah. And thinking back to my trial days, even just like the yes, no questions, how many of you have bumper stickers on your car? Like, I mean, just stuff like that, for whatever reason, a court got into its mind that they're supposed to ask, how many of you listen to country music? So, okay, juror number 1, you can put your hand down. Juror number 3, juror number, and everybody, fascinated. Okay, this guy listens to country music. It seems to me that there's a technological way of solving that too, so we don't have to, do that, like go around the room and confirm that 40 people either raised their hand or didn't raise their hand at one time.
Yeah, we have one of our workflows, we get like 8 on the sidebar, but one of them is called hand raisers, right? Where they're basically, the checkbox, right? So the whole team can sort of go through, we're built on Google's Firebase. So it's same sort of real-time collaboration, but, just click the boxes for question 1. So then we know it, right? Check the boxes for question 2, and then we know it, instead of whatever your code is for quickly writing that down. But I do think the more we put that on written surveys pre-trial day, the better, and just the more efficient.
Yeah, well, and why not? Like, every single juror probably has a cell phone in their pocket, or most jurors do.
Yeah.
I imagine you've probably thought about how that might be leveraged too in the process.
Right. Everyone's got a browser now, right? You can get it on all your phone. They've all got a browser. So if you can, enter in and give you click your check boxes on a browser on your phone, why would we do it any other way?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad to hear that somebody is innovating in this space. And God, it seems to me that there's, jurors vote, your history is with other voting. It all seems so, tied together.
Yeah, that's interesting.
eh,
I mean, it is. I guess you're right. Like in a way, the most democratic part of the judicial branch is the jury. Right? It's
mhm.
really an amazing institution, and uh, I didn't really appreciate. Like I've never had a jury trial, and I didn't really read up on it much in law school. But now that I'm sort of swimming in it, um, it's unique to our country, and it's kind of amazing to think that let's let 12 citizens, you guys decide, right? Right. I mean, it's really sort of that the republic and the role of the citizen at the center of things. It's really an amazing thing.
Yeah, the whole jury of peers. I've had so many clients tell me like, I don't think these are my peers, and uh, any tools to be able to get to understand them, not only from the client's perspective to give them comfort with it, but from the attorney's perspective and the court's perspective. I don't know. It just seems like the time is right. Um, so how are you thinking about approaching the various markets? Like if I'm if I guess that question, but then I also want to find out like if I'm a judge and I'm hearing this and I'm like I want my courtroom to run more efficiently with these jury trials. um, what should they do? How should they go about, engaging with you? Same with jury consultants, same with law firms of all sizes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, Judge Landau, right? He just emailed. Actually, we met on Twitter. I'm Dan at jurorsearch.com. And that's the easiest way, is just to engage because I think um, software works best when the client says, I get this is what you have, but let me tell you, this is what I want.
Hmm.
And let me know if you can deliver that. Because you and I know the answer is almost always yes. That software is so malleable. And I think people have sort of gotten accustomed to thinking of a software product like, a commodity product or like a physical product. Like it is what it is and like deal with it and live with it or don't. But we know you can shape it any way somebody wants. And so it's most helpful when people will say, what I really want is the ability to do this, or I wish I could do that. And then we can do it for people. So that's really sort of the golden nuggets of when people are willing to share, I wish I could do this, or I wish I could do that. If only it could work this way. Because then we can build what people really want.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that there's probably the possibilities for the technology right now probably outweigh the will to adopt it in terms of especially courts. And what I mean by that is the legal industry and the governmental part of the legal industry tends to move very slowly and very cautiously, and for good reasons. I mean,
Yeah.
they're dealing with some very heavy stuff that affects people's lives. So, you can't have the let's move fast and break shit mentality in the courts, right?
Government don't
But
work that way. Right.
yeah, but thinking it through, if I'm ever back in the courtroom, what I want is an augmented reality view of all the jurors sitting around, and so they raise their hand and the software just goes, okay, that guy just raised his hand, that guy, and it marks it and stuff like that. And so you could have a compiled data view of, okay, this person responded this way to this and this way to that, and it's weighted this for your client is weighted this way for, so you've got some kind of like algorithmic based or even artificial intelligence based help there. I mean, because that's really what juror consultants do. But there's a lot of jury consultants out there that are great, but there's a lot of them that are just, frankly, quacks. Um, you know, too. I mean, just it's almost like magic. Like I can determine what's in your mind and your history by looking at the contours of your face, for example. Like I've had that pitch, and I
Is
find
that
that
right?
very hard to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm sure some attorneys have had good results with consultants like that, but is it that it's actually effective because it's not data driven and you can't go back and you can't prove whether it worked or not? Or is it
Yeah.
the case of even a broken clock is right twice a day? And so
Right.
there's just enough data that it works as well as it doesn't work. I mean, so
Well,
so to
I
be
should
able to
give a
solve that.
pitch. I mean, I'll give a pitch. I'm a member of a group called the American Society of Trial Consultants. So it's
Mhm,
not super well known, but it's a really good group of sort of, legit jury consultants, right? A lot of PhDs and stuff like that. So
mhm.
if you are in the market for a jury consultant, because I imagine there must be some people that are kind of like, I haven't come across them, but I'm sure they're out there that are, like fortune teller types,
Yep.
right? And so how do you know whether somebody's legit or not? Well, one decent way, at least, one potential filter is to check that group out. Because I found at least jury consultants there, they're all nice, they're all smart, they're
Mhm.
sort of humble as well about the predictive value of anything. But
Right,
it's
right.
helpful, right, to suggest which questions to ask, right, to which sort of, to your point, are you a lion or a sheep? Are you exhibiting leadership qualities? What's your general inclination towards authority? Your general inclination towards, are you science based or sort of, science skeptic? Depending on what your case is, how do you feel about law enforcement generally, right? So those kind of things that can be helpful heuristics. But
Mhm.
that's their industry a little bit more than mine. But
Well, but it's also something that, if they can provide data, and especially if there's comparative analytics, not only what happens within the trial, but to the extent that if a jury consultant says this person is likely to vote not guilty, and you interview the jury afterwards, and that person was like, I knew that person was guilty from the second I saw him. He just had that guilty look about him. And so the jury consultant is flat wrong. Those are statistics that I think somebody involved as a litigant in the justice system should be entitled to know. And to the extent that can be democratized, I think that makes a very interesting argument for making jury trials more fair and more transparent.
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's sort of like you know, we get requests for data, right? And there are data vendors out there. And one of the values we try to bring is, making that data, which, you get a big spreadsheet on somebody and what do you do with it? So we can put it into Jurorsearch. So it's, intuitive user face and incorporate your
Mhm.
trial notes and, have your per juror discussion. But, you know, all data is imperfect. And so, a lot of it is based off of public opinion surveys and then building a model and then assigning a score to every voter or every, resident on the commercial file
Mhm.
and saying, this person is in the 22nd, decile of, support for Black Lives Matter, or this person is a believer in reproductive freedom at the 81st. Well, is it 81 or 75 or 92? Who knows, right? People are complicated, right? People
Mhm.
can change their minds a little bit. But there's definitely a demand for some number
Mhm.
attached to a person that gives some predictive value about how that person, what person's values are, or how they think. And there are vendors out there, but nothing is 100%. Nothing's certain, right? You do the best you can with what you have.
Yeah, and reading people is becoming a different art because there's this disconnect. A lot of the true expression or the unfiltered expression is done online. Some of it's done anonymously, and after being cooped up in their houses for so long with the pandemic, is the old way of reading people? Is it still? I just think you've got a lot of opportunity here to really change an industry, and it just seems like really with all legal tech, but especially with trial tech and what you're doing, there's such a window right now for it.
Cool,
Um,
thanks. I tell you, the social media stuff's interesting because in the last year, I think all of us, got on it a lot more, right? So we couldn't really talk to people. And so there's definitely a demand for, scraping through, right? And if there's time, depending on how early you get the veneer, right? If you get it a few days before, then you can go look on, the large social media platforms. And a lot of times people will say, if it's criminal trial, Blue Lives Matter, right? Or, participating in the George Floyd protests. And that gives you a really good indication how they're going to feel when the state says, this person did it, and whether you think that
mhm.
state official is telling the truth or not.
That's really interesting. Do you, have you experimented with or looked into tapping into some of the APIs that are available to maybe automate some of that? Or is that even possible? I don't, I know that there's some data aggregation that can
There's
happen. I know
some,
that the whole
like at least,
privacy argument is
I
maybe
mean,
closing the
so
door to
for
that a little
social
bit.
media, a lot of clients ask for it, right? And they kind of
Hmm.
want to be able to like press a button and do a scrape. But if it's out there, I haven't found it. And what I
Hmm.
found is happening is that there are people that get pretty good at, going through people's accounts quickly and scanning for something that jumps out. But I
Hmm.
don't think the web scrapers or the AI or whatever has evolved to the point where it's better than humans at
Hmm.
finding what is relevant to learning about some bias or inclination of a juror. It may get there, but
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be there today.
Well, and it begs the question, talking with a friend who's more of an old school physician, nearing retirement, um, about how he sees what he's done and how he sees the physicians that are just coming out of medical school unable to make some of the same calls, make some of the on the fly diagnoses and adjustments and so forth, because they're so much more technology dependent. I wonder,
Hmm.
I wonder just the whole, like, the art, if you will, of the that human element. I wonder to what extent that's going to be kind of like a dying breed as these technologies, in terms of reading people and compiling that type of data about people, becomes more available.
Yeah, I do hear that from the consultants that say all the data is great, it's helpful, but um, you know, reading the person and being there, right, in the same room, especially when there's a group, um, and being able to ask a follow-up question and seeing how the juror next to him reacts to that question and that answer, and just sort of
Hmm.
reading people. I think at least what I'm not a jury consultant, right? I don't pick them, but I do hear them say it's great to have all this information organized. What we think, have it clearly organized, convey it to the attorney so the attorney can act on it. But they do say we're doing some virtual trials. It's harder because you cannot beat like seeing the
Hmm.
person live, and just reading whether they're, hostile or apathetic or engaged, or, you know, or what they say is, we're really worried about the quiet one that really wants to be on the jury to make a point.
Hmm.
That's the one that they're both sides are scared of. Right? Somebody who's like, I'm anti Monsanto, right? So I really want to get on this one, or like I'm against big companies, so like I can't wait to make a point, right? Or I'm against the police, right? So I really want to get on this jury, or whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
That's what I keep hearing is sort of a lot of jury selection is deselection, right? Making sure
Hmm.
the worst ones for you
Really?
aren't on, which all seems fair from a systems perspective, right? So you end up with people that are, can be fair and aren't in there to be an advocate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the whole point of it is to eliminate those with biases. But I mean, the goal is to stack it in your favor as much as you possibly can, and in the process, from the duty of the individual attorney.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah, it's a really
Interesting.
cool process. It's super interesting. But you're right. It's just very hard to do on paper.
So for our audience that's interested in jumping into this product, and I think that I've looked at the product. We've had this is our second discussion about it, and I think it's something that if I were doing jury trials right now, I would definitely want to experiment with. And so my next question would be, how do I get it, and what does it cost?
Yeah. So
What?
thank you. So it's on jurorsearch.com. We're happy to offer anybody a free trial. We've changed our pricing. We just keep hearing people want a per trial price. We thought of
Mhm.
ourselves as a SaaS company, so we thought, well, we will charge a monthly subscription of $1,000 a month, or an annual for $10,000. And people just said, no, I just don't want to do a monthly. Like maybe I'll get an
Mhm.
annual, right, if I have the volume. So we just switched to a, per trial $1,000, $9.99. And then
Mhm.
we'll, if people want a free trial, feel free, right? Give it a shot. And then just give me your feedback afterwards so we can improve the product. And so if you try it and you like it, and you find that it's more efficient, you're more productive,
Mhm.
and you're not losing notes, which is inevitable when you're writing stuff down, um, then go ahead, buy a trial. And if you really like it with your office, buy it for the year. And then you have unlimited trials. But it's meant for unlimited users, even with per trial,
Mhm.
because it's built for collaboration. So get a few more people on it so they can take the notes, so that your questioning attorney can read the people and then see all those notes at a glance in the way that he or she likes to see, either visually or a list. If you want
Mhm.
somebody to prompt you, have big text or small text, whatever that attorney likes on his or her screen. That's the whole point.
I think that I think this is something that's going to catch on. I think it's an idea that whose time has come. I'm excited to see where this goes. I'm excited to hear stories about attorneys that have used it, and courtrooms that have used it. I really hope that you make a lot of progress with the courts, because I really think if you could get this into the courts, you're gonna change the face of jury selection, and it's about time. Um, I know we're right at about time here, at about the hour mark, and I want to make sure that that we wrap up with anything else that you would like our listeners to know, either about you or about your product.
Oh,
I'll let
thanks.
you
I
have the
mean,
last word.
yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks again, Dan. This is a lot of fun, and I appreciate you, chatting with me. I guess the one thing, if you're on the government side, is we just this week sort of announced government discounts, right? So like Westlaw, and they all have, and deep discounts for government. So it's just sort of interesting. We did this discount based on your population. So if you're on the public defender side or the prosecutor side, we made it a lot more accessible, and 90% off if you're a tiny little jurisdiction, or 50% off if you're medium, something like that. But I guess I'd also like to ask, interestingly, like in our market, right, it's bifurcated where there's top tier, not top tier, but high end, high dollar civil litigators that we're sort of pricing it for. But there's also a bunch of solos and small firms where, even though it's the same product, right, we're just in different markets. And so how to price that for a more accessible price for, solos or criminal defense attorneys, where they might say, like, I'd love to have it, but like $1,000 is, out of budget because I've got lower rates. I'd be curious to hear folks say, like, how do you price something for, for one class of customers and then another class? And so that's sort of the experiment we're on as jury trials open up. But that's why I'd love to, offer people a free trial, try it, and then tell me what you think is sort of a reasonable price for you. Because who knows, right? We're discovering.
Thank you. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and sign off for today. Again, can you say the name of your company one more time, and then your website so people can go right to it?
Thank you. It's Jurorsearch, Jurorsearch, and it's jurorsearch.com.